They say America doesn't make anything anymore. But here's the real kicker. What if the most American things you touch, eat, and scroll through every single day are quietly controlled by China? Your bacon, your sneakers, even the app your kids are glued to. Behind the curtain of American life, Chinese companies are pulling strings worth billions. Some deals went through in silence. Others blew up in fiery political scandals. Today, we expose how America's supply chain was made in China's image, and how in 2025, that house of cards is starting to collapse.
Now, the US president says that he is ready to impose sanctions on Russia in order to end the war in Ukraine, but only if NATO members agree to massive tariffs on China.
And what he's essentially done here is say, look, I will impose sanctions on Russia, but it's got to be on these conditions.
2013. Out of nowhere, a Chinese company called Shuanghui, today known as WH Group, swallowed up Smithfield Foods, America's biggest pork producer. Price tag? $4.7 billion.
Today, in what was a surprising move to many, Smithfield Foods announced that the Chinese company Shuanghui International would be purchasing the US-based company for $7.1 billion. This acquisition registers as the single largest Chinese buyout of an American company to date.
That means your ribs, your hot dogs, your bacon cheeseburger. Now owned by a Chinese parent company headquartered in Hong Kong. At the time, Washington didn't just allow it. They basically rolled out the red carpet. It was the largest Chinese takeover of an American company. China owns our farmland.
Chinese businesses buying up farmland. Here's senior national correspondent Brian Enton reporting from Oklahoma.
All right, here's one of the Chinese places right here, and they just built this barn in the last 8 months, and the door's open, by the way.
We do want to go by the numbers tonight on a little bit here, okay? Put the first number up. 277,000. As of 2023, Chinese owners had just over 277,000 acres of agricultural land, less than 1% of all the foreign-held land here in the United States. And it's actually down from a year earlier when you're at 347,000, just about, in terms of 347,000 acres. It's still a huge increase, though. Over 15 years ago, China held just under 14,000 acres in the United States. Now, you look at this a little bit closer, and the data shows that by far it's the, you see it right in here, the state of Texas that has the most Chinese-owned land. It's almost 124,000 acres right there, 123,708. And it's North Carolina, Missouri, and Florida that follow on the map behind me in terms of the biggest owners, landowners in the United States. Now, here's what's interesting about it as well. Canada, with 15.3 million acres. They're number one in terms of foreign-owned land, right? So, and the Canadian land, or the percentage of foreign-owned land, comes to 33%.
Fox News and talk radio went wild. Politicians vowed to stop the takeover of American soil. But here's the truth. Yes, Chinese investors own U.S. farmland. And the real flashpoint came when Chinese-backed projects got a little too close to U.S. military bases. 2022, Grand Forks, North Dakota. A Chinese company planned to build a corn mill. Sounds boring, until the Air Force noticed it sat practically in the backyard of a sensitive drone base. Their verdict? A national security risk. Deal. Dead on arrival.
North Dakota, a group of determined residents fought back against a project planned by a Chinese company suspiciously close to an Air Force base.
It was, Nicole. We are outside Grand Forks Air Force Base now, and at the end of the day, this is really a story about everyday American people who took on China, who took on their own city council because they were so worried that this Chinese corn mill was going to go in very, very close to this military base.
Here's the thing. Farmland is emotional, but ports are power. They're the arteries of American trade. Whoever controls ports controls the bloodstream of the economy. Back in 2019, China's state-owned giant Costco was forced by U.S. regulators to sell the Long Beach container terminal. Why? Because letting China own one of America's busiest shipping hubs is like giving a stranger the keys to your house. They sold it off for $1.78 billion. Same playbook with hotels. In 2014, Chinese insurer Anbang dropped almost $2 billion to buy the Waldorf Astoria in New York. Instantly, U.S. diplomats stopped staying there. Why? Because everyone suspected the place was wired like a spy novel. Years later, Beijing literally seized control of Anbang itself, showing that billion-dollar American trophies can evaporate overnight. Ports move goods, but apps move data. And in 2025, data is the new oil and the new weapon. TikTok, America's favorite time waster, 170 million users, parent company. ByteDance, headquartered in Beijing. The US government doesn't care about your dance videos. It cares about who controls the personal data of nearly half the country. In January 2025, the Supreme Court upheld a law forcing ByteDance to sell TikTok's US operations, or get banned.
The Supreme Court moments ago upheld the TikTok ban, ruling the app can shut down as soon as Sunday if the company's Chinese owner, ByteDance, does not divest.
Yeah, this is an overwhelming victory for the government and a sound defeat for TikTok. What I notice is that the court here has issued a per curiam opinion. That is, they're speaking in one voice, all 9 justices. There are no dissents here. Everyone agrees. This law that Congress passed, ordering divestiture of TikTok's foreign ownership, passes constitutional muster. One thing I do notice is that there are 2 justices who concurred. That is, they joined the opinion here, but they wrote separately to just pull out a couple of things that they found interesting. And one of those is Justice Gorsuch, who said, whether this law will succeed, I do not know. But the question we face today is not the law's wisdom, but its constitutionality.
No exceptions. This is the same watchdog, CFIUS, that forced the Chinese owner of Grindr to sell back in 2020 over fears of blackmail and data leaks. CFIUS doesn't care about your memes. They exist to stop foreign companies from poking holes in US national security. And TikTok, that's the crown jewel of this fight. Now, let's talk fast fashion. If you've seen Temu or Shein ads promising $2 shirts and $3 earrings, you've seen China's most dangerous retail invasion. These apps exploit a loophole called de minimis. Basically, if a package is under $800, it skips tariffs and deep customs inspection. That means Chinese sellers can ship millions of tiny packages straight into American homes, bypassing the system. Here's the insane part. In 2023, U.S. Customs reported that 92% of cargo entries into America were these tiny de minimis packages. 92%. And a House report warned Temu had no system to stop goods made with forced labor in Xinjiang. In other words, America's front door has been left wide open, and China is sprinting through.
Chinese fast fashion brand Shein and home goods retailer Temu are grappling with forced labor accusations. A House committee report took aim at the companies Friday, saying their business models take advantage of U.S. law through a shipping loophole and accusing them of failing to screen for forced labor. Typically, foreign companies selling to U.S. customers will send their goods into the country in bulk. But combined, Shein and Temu instead ship nearly 600,000 individual packages to the U.S. a day. By law, imports valued at less than $800 enter the U.S. tax and duty-free as long as they're packaged and addressed to individual buyers. It's called the de minimis rule. Congress raised the threshold from $200 to $800 in 2016. Following the change, import volume jumped from 220 million packages that year to over 770 million in 2021.
Here's something you don't hear often. Chinese investment in America already peaked years ago. 2016 was the golden year, nearly $50 billion in deals, everything from tech startups to real estate. But 2 years later, that number collapsed to under $5 billion. Why? 2 reasons. Beijing started choking capital outflows, and Washington started slamming the brakes with tougher reviews. The golden pipeline froze. So while the internet screams that China is buying America, the reality is that buying spree is already in the rearview mirror. Fast forward to today, May 2024. The U.S. quadruples tariffs on Chinese EVs to 100%. Solar panels, semiconductors, batteries, all slapped with new duties. Washington is drawing battle lines around the industries of the future. Meanwhile, state governments are passing farmland bans specifically targeting Chinese buyers. Location, data, and strategic technology. That's the holy trinity of national security now. And make no mistake, both parties in Washington agree on this. For once, Republicans and Democrats are unified. The age of let China buy anything is over. So, does China own America? Not quite. What they do own are pieces Smithfield pork, a few trophy hotels, TikTok for now, Temu flooding our mailboxes. But the walls are closing in. Regulators are rewriting the rules. Deals once celebrated are now toxic. Land near bases, off limits. Apps with data, divest or die. Ports, already reclaimed. The American supply chain was made in China. But in 2025, we're watching the great unraveling. And that leaves one brutal question. What happens when two superpowers no longer trade trust, only tariffs? This was behind the billions, the secrets they don't want you to know about global empires. Dark money and billion-dollar schemes. Hit subscribe because the supply chain may be made in China, but your knowledge, that's made right here.